Now, as we mentioned, the first philosopher is Thales. Now, Thales came from, and we say this is all Greek philosophy, but what's interesting is Thales was a native of a city called Miletus in Asia Minor. That is, it's a place near Izmir province. That's Izmir, Turkey. So back in those days, we're going to find that philosophy springs up in Turkey, in Italy, that is in Sicily, and in Greece. And they were all Greek-speaking colonies, Greek speakers back in those days. And we actually have a date for him around 585 before the Common Era. And the reason we actually have that is not only was Thales the first guy to get started thinking philosophically, but he was also an astronomer, and he actually predicted the date of an eclipse, and we know when that eclipse occurred. So as a result, this gives us a good reason. It substantiated where he lived. Now, what's interesting is we're going to see with the early philosophers, we're going to have fragments of what they wrote surviving. Although in the case of Thales, it's really very interesting because we don't have any fragments of his work surviving. Rather, we only have fragments from other people, from other philosophers who refer to Thales, Aristotle being one of them, and it seems that Thales is the person to get philosophical thinking started, rather than looking for the mythological accounts for what's going on, the God accounts of what's going on. Thales was a scientist looking for explanations, and he wanted to figure out where the world came from, where the cosmos came from. Aristotle attributes 4 views to Thales. The first one is that the earth rests on water. Dikelo is the name of Aristotle's work. It means on the heavens. Kind of strange. This is the great stuff we were waiting for. Thales accounting for what goes on in the world. The earth rests on water. It looks a lot like the picture we saw a few slides back of the mythological view of the world. Water is the arche. Remember, of all things. Remember, arche was the beginning or the principle. So water is the fundamental principle of all things. Then the magnet has a soul, in De Animus, something about the living, Aristotle's work on the living, kind of a work on biology. And the fourth thing that he attributes to Thales is all things are full of gods. Now, when you look at it, you're wondering, oh, this is what I came to study. This is what I'm going to go home and tell my friends and family. I learned these great views, these brilliant issues. The earth rests on water. The water is the arche, the material principle of all things. The magnet has a soul, and all things are full of God. And your friends and family might be asking, what is it that you're studying in school? What are you going to do with any of this stuff? This seems like a very, very bizarre, very strange collection of really, really strange views. And what we have to think about for a while is what makes these views philosophically or scientifically interesting. That is, I'm presenting this as being where philosophy got started, and you're hoping, gee, this isn't everything that's there. But the question is, what is philosophically interesting? Or scientifically, is this about ethics? Doesn't sound like metaphysics. Well, maybe the water being the origin of all things. Epistemology, the theory of knowledge? I don't think so. Science? Well, maybe it's not very scientific. But let me assure you that without Thales getting the ball rolling, the cell phones that you're on, the computers that you run, all the technology we live with is all based on science, and all the science was based on people like Thales getting going. And we're going to have to spend a little time trying to figure out why is this? Why are Thales' views philosophically interesting? Well, let's take a look at the first one. First of Thales' principles, or principles attributed. The earth rests on water. Why would that be interesting, scientifically or philosophically? What does explain scientifically or philosophically? Well, think about it. If the earth rests on water, it's kind of like a ship in water. Now, what happens with a ship? Ship bounces around in the water with the waves. But notice, and back in those days, there was what's called seismic activity, earthquake activity, back in ancient Greece. So maybe this claim about the earth being sort of like a ship resting on water will explain earthquakes. Now, if we go back to the mythological explanations, what's the story? Well, the earth god was mad, or the underworld god was mad, so he's causing everything to hiccup. But I think what we see here is an hypothesis to explain the puzzling phenomena. Why are there earthquakes? If the earth floats on water, we can understand what happens, right? The earth is rocked by the wave actions of water on which it floats, like a boat or like a log. If you see a log in the water, look, we just went through enough water. I don't think Thales came to these views because he was the victim of a hurricane like many of us have been recently. But nonetheless, it's the idea of the earth having an earthquake, the earth floating on water. It is really it's really important that this is an attempt at an explanation. Not that it was a good theory, not that it explains everything, not that it's a great piece of science, but rather it's an attempt to explain that what happens is not irregular. It's part of a series of causes, that there is an explanation, there is a principle, a material principle of why things are happening or why things happen. Let's take a look at the second major principle that Aristotle attributes to Thales. That is, number 2, water is the arche of all things, the beginning and the material of principle of all things. Arche is Aristotle's word, or the word he uses. It's a Greek word. It means beginning or source or principle, like in archaic or archaeology. Archaic, something that happened at the beginning. Archaeology, where things got started. You dig up, or architect, that you're the originator of something. And Aristotle here is talking about what he called the material arche, the material principle, which can either be the stuff from which something originated, where it came into being, where the cosmos came into being, maybe from water, or the stuff which it is composed of. So it looks like Thales thought, at least this is what Aristotle tells us, that everything either originated in water, cosmogony, the origin of the cosmos was from water, or is actually now made of water. It's constituted of water. Its constitution is water. And when we read the quote, the paragraph from, or the passage, from Professor Irwin, we see he's talking about, the material principle, talking about where it came from, what the material principle, and what it's constantly made of, what its constitution is. Now ask yourself, with regard to this principle that Aristotle in his Metaphysics attributes to Thales. What's the scientific interest of Thales' ruminations about water? Ruminations, his deep thoughts about water. He's having these deep thoughts, these ruminations about water. What's so great about it? I mean, what happens if he came and said everything was made up of earth or something like that? Why is this so interesting? Why is this better than the mythological explanations that the gods got together, had sex, and all kinds of things came forth as a result, which is what you heard in, Hesiod's Theogony, and it was handed down in Homer in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Well, Thales is attempting to provide a theory. And there are a couple of things that are interesting about this theory, because the theory is, first of all, it's general. It covers a whole range of similar cases, not just a single one. Notice in the mythological explanation, why was the boat lost? Well, Poseidon caused the wave to swallow up the boat in the ocean. That's a one-time explanation. That's one thing that it explains. Here, it's a general principle. Everything comes forth from water. You see, water is applied to a seed. It grows. The act of procreation, something that you've, I hope, have learned in your earlier education, about sex. What is the beginning? Where do you come from? Remember the sperm and the egg? Well, the sperm is wrapped up in wet. To them, keep in mind, back in ancient Greece, they didn't have any microscopes. They didn't know about sperm and egg. They just knew that there was this copulation, and there was some wet stuff, and as a result of the wet stuff, a baby was born. In addition to which, it also explains how Earth is coming, and we have something that's going to hit our next point. That is, it's based on observation, even though it transcends, it goes beyond what the observation. How is it based on observation? Think back to our clip from Carl Sagan in Cosmos. He said that what Thales must have noticed is at the mouth of a river, when a river is dumping itself into another body of water, all of a sudden in what's called the delta, silt, dirt is deposited. So it looks like right at that point in the river, the water is actually making dry land. So it's based on observation, but it goes past all the observations. And the most interesting thing at this point from our perspective is that Thales' theory does not appeal to gods, does not appeal to the random action of gods. Rather, there's a material principle. There's a consistency in nature. Things happen in a regular, orderly fashion because there's a material principle of nature that makes it happen. It is a very, very, very different way of thinking than the mythological approach, than the creation story approach.